Florida has more than 200 ghost towns, and that number surprises even people who grew up there. Most of them date from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and they share a familiar arc. Ambitious founders show up, extractive industries strip the land bare, a catastrophic hurricane or epidemic finishes the job, and the subtropical landscape swallows whatever gets left behind. These are 15 of those lost communities. One of them was the wealthiest city in pre-statehood Florida before yellow fever and back-to-back hurricanes leveled it in under 3 years. Another was a hollow earth cult compound built in the mangroves of southwest Florida. And one of them, a phosphate company town in Polk County, is where the inventor of the digital computer spent his childhood. Every single one of these places was founded in optimism, sustained by exploitation, and erased by the very forces its founders chose to ignore. Subscribe to the channel now and make sure you stick around until the end, because the final towns might surprise you. 1. St. Joseph Gulf County, on St. Joseph Bay. Founded in 1835, abandoned by 1844, and at its peak, it held the title of the most populous city in Florida. The whole thing lasted less than a decade. A real estate dispute started it. The Apalachicola Land Company controlled the 1.2 million acre Forbes Purchase, land originally acquired from Creek and Seminole peoples by a Scottish trading firm. And when the company priced lots too high, frustrated residents packed up and built a rival port city from scratch. An 8-mile rail line connected the new settlement to Lake Wimico and the Apalachicola River's cotton trade, which meant money flowed in fast. By 1837, St. Joseph had outgrown every other settlement in Florida. Population estimates at peak range wildly from 4,000 to 12,000. Though the 1840 federal census recorded only about 750 free whites. That gap likely reflects the transient sailors, visitors, and enslaved people the census didn't bother counting. The town boasted warehouses, wharves, hotels, a horse racing track, a gambling house, and a newspaper, which earned it the nickname the wickedest city in the Southeast. Historian Robert R. Hearst Jr. pushed back on that reputation in the Florida Historical Quarterly, cautioning that much of this legend belongs to folklore rather than history. What nobody can dispute is what happened on December 3, 1838, when Florida's first constitutional convention convened right there in St. Joseph. Convention President Robert Raymond Reed presided over delegates described as mainly planters and lawyers from 13 of the nation's 26 states and 4 foreign countries, with only 3 native Floridians among them. 3 of those delegates later became U.S. senators, 2 became governors, and 5 ended up on the state Supreme Court. And the original signed constitution from that convention has never been found. The only surviving copy turned up in 1982, when the Galfin family discovered a secretary's version in Fernandina Beach, and it now sits in the state archives. Destruction came in waves after that. A ship carried yellow fever into the port in 1841, and the estimated population collapsed from around 5,000 to roughly 500 in less than a year. Governor Reed died of the disease himself. September 14, 1841 brought a hurricane that smashed the wharf, and a forest fire followed close behind. By 1843, residents of Apalachicola were floating entire St. Joseph houses on barges back to their city, where a few reportedly still stand. When the USS General Taylor arrived on May 1, 1844, the crew found the town nearly deserted, and a final hurricane on September 9th of that year obliterated the rest. Contemporary observers interpreted the storm surge as God's wrath. Today, the old St. Joseph Cemetery, known locally as the Yellow Fever Cemetery, survives in present-day Port St. Joe, and the Constitution Convention Museum State Park covers 14 acres with life-sized audio-animated delegate figures and a marble monument erected in 1922 bearing every delegate's name. 2. Ellaville, Madison County, right at the confluence of the Suwannee and Withlacoochee rivers. George Franklin Drew founded it around 1861, and the post office didn't officially close until 1942, but the town had been dying for decades by then. Drew came from New Hampshire, born in 1827, and learned steam engineering at the Locks and Canal Company in Lowell, Massachusetts before heading south. The name Ellaville came from Ella, described in different sources as either his longtime African-American servant or one of his longtime slaves, and the exact nature of that relationship remains disputed. What nobody disputes is the scale of his operation. Drew partnered with Prussian immigrant Louis Bucky to form the Drew and Bucky Lumber Company, which grew into the largest sawmill in Florida. 1,200 acres near Ellaville, 90,000 acres of timberlands, 500 employees, and branch offices in both New York and Jacksonville. The town held roughly 1,000 residents at peak, with 2 schools, 2 churches, a steamboat dock, a Masonic lodge, and direct rail service. People called Drew Millionaire Drew, and they weren't exaggerating. Construction on his 10-room mansion began in 1868, and the place featured oak parquet floors, an imported mahogany staircase, marble fireplaces, and a distinction few homes in the area could claim at the time: running water, indoor plumbing, electricity, and a telephone. Drew won the governor's race in 1876 as Florida's 12th governor and the first elected after Reconstruction, serving from 1877 to 1881. But here's the thing most people miss about Drew. During the Civil War, Confederate authorities imprisoned him in Savannah for a year on charges of disloyalty after he helped a man named H.R. Linthicum escape the Confederate draft. Years later, a U.S. Court of Claims awarded him $35,000 for cotton Union forces had seized, finding him, in their words, always loyal to the United States. Ellaville's decline unfolded over decades. Unsustainable harvesting exhausted the surrounding yellow pine forests, and the original mill burned in 1898. Rebuilding didn't matter much when the timber was already depleted. Drew had sold his shares to Bucky back in 1883 and relocated to Jacksonville, where he died on September 26, 1900, just hours after arranging his wife Amelia's funeral. One newspaper reported he died of a broken heart. Recurring floods battered the remaining families, especially the catastrophic August 1928 Suwannee River flood, and the population had already dropped to 300 by 1895. $10,000 of state money went towards saving the Drew Mansion, but vandals stripped it of everything useful, and someone set it ablaze in the 1970s. Suwannee River State Park now contains what's left. The Hillman Bridge, built in 1925 and closed in 1986, serves as a pedestrian and cyclist path, and foundation ruins from the mansion are visible in winter along the Drew Mansion Ruins Trail. 3. Port Leon, Wakulla County, east bank of the St. Marks River, about 3 miles south of St. Marks. A single night storm surge destroyed this place on September 13, 1843, barely 6 years after it was founded. Richard Keith Call, who served as both president of the Tallahassee Railroad Company and territorial governor of Florida, created Port Leon as a railroad terminus to intercept the cotton trade. St. Marks refused to give away free land for railroad warehouses, so Call responded by building a bridge over the river and extending track to deeper water at a new site. Lot advertisements at the time declared the location, and this is a direct quote, handsomely located on the most elevated site on the bay beyond the influence of the highest tides. The Friends of St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge later noted that this claim proved to be devastatingly inaccurate. Port Leon grew to between 200 and 450 residents and handled 30,000 to 40,000 bales of cotton annually. That all stalled in 1841 when a steamboat passenger from Key West introduced yellow fever, which killed 139 people over 3 months. On March 11, 1843, the town earned designation as the seat of the newly created Wakulla County. 6 months of official status is all it got. September 13th brought a hurricane with a 10-foot storm surge that flattened every dwelling and shoved the railroad bridge upriver. Winds picked up on the morning of September 13th, eased in the afternoon long enough to calm residents' nerves, and then by midnight, the water came. 1 person died in Port Leon and 13 perished at the nearby lighthouse. Survivors voted to relocate to higher ground and establish the town of Newport about 4 miles north. The site now sits within the St. Marks National Wildlife Refuge, where old wharf pilings, wooden culverts, and the original railroad grade remain visible. A sign on the Mound Trail marks the 1843 high water line. And the abandoned railroad corridor became Florida's first Rails to Trails project in 1984. 4. Flamingo, Monroe County, at the absolute southern tip of the Florida Peninsula. Families settled here around 1892 and named their post office in 1893 after the most eye-catching bird in the area, flamingos that crossed over from Cuba and the Bahamas. By 1900, about 50 families lived in Flamingo, and the whole community folded into Everglades National Park when it was established in 1947. Those families survived on fishing, farming, charcoal making, and the plume trade. That last one paid the best. Bird feathers destined for women's hats fetched $32 an ounce, which was double the going price of gold, according to Frank Chapman of the American Museum of Natural History. Across Florida, as many as 5 million birds were slaughtered per year at the trade's height. And that's where Guy Morrell Bradley enters the story. Born in 1870, Bradley became one of America's first game wardens when the American Ornithologists Union hired him in 1902 at a monthly stipend of $35 to patrol from the 10,000 Islands to Key West. The twist is that Bradley had been a plume hunter himself before switching sides. His own words to the Florida Audubon Society: "I used to hunt plume birds, but since the game laws were passed, I have not killed a plume bird." July 8, 1905, changed everything. Bradley confronted Walter Smith, a 59-year-old Civil War veteran, and his 2 sons near Oyster Keys, where they were shooting birds. Smith had already delivered a warning: "You ever arrest one of my boys again, I'll kill you." That day, Smith fired his hunting rifle and fatally wounded Bradley, whose body turned up 10 miles away the next morning. Evidence showed Bradley's pistol had not been fired, but Smith claimed self-defense anyway, and a grand jury returned no true bill on December 8, 1905. Smith walked free. Bradley's brothers-in-law retaliated by burning Smith's Flamingo home to the ground. William Dutcher captured the outrage in Bradley's obituary for bird lore. A faithful and devoted warden cut off in a moment for what? That a few more plume birds might be secured to adorn heartless women's bonnets. Bradley's murder energized the bird protection movement, strengthened enforcement laws, and helped create the momentum that brought Everglades National Park into existence. The Guy Bradley Award, established in 1988, still goes out annually for wildlife law enforcement. Hurricane Donna washed Bradley's grave off Cape Sable in 1960. But the recovered gravestone now sits on display at the Guy Bradley Visitor Center, renamed from the Flamingo Visitor Center in October 2023. That same month, a new Flamingo Lodge and restaurant opened, constructed from elevated climate-resistant modified shipping containers after Hurricane Wilma's 9-foot storm surge destroyed the original 1959 lodge back in 2005. 5. Stiltsville, Miami-Dade County, 1 mile south of Cape Florida. Out in the shallows of Biscayne Bay, a man called Crawfish Eddie Walker hammered together the first stilt shack here around 1933 during Prohibition's dying days and sold bait, beer, and crawfish chowder 1 mile offshore, where gambling technically fell outside the law. 27 structures stood on pilings about 10 feet above shallow water by 1960, and each one had its own personality. The Quarterdeck Club earned a feature in Life magazine in 1941 for its gambling and entertainment. The Bikini Club, which appeared around 1962, charged $1 memberships, offered free drinks to women in bikinis, and hosted nude sunbathing until the Florida Beverage Commission raided it in the summer of 1965. Hurricane Betsy tore through on September 8, 1965, and destroyed most of the structures, which prompted the state to ban new construction and impose lease fees. Hurricane Andrew in August of 1992 left only 7 buildings standing. When the National Park Service announced plans to demolish the remaining structures by a 1999 deadline, 75,000 people signed a petition to stop it. The Stiltsville Trust formed in 2003 and now maintains 6 to 7 structures under a cooperative agreement with Biscayne National Park, though the Lishaw House burned down on January 11, 2021. Historian Dr. Paul George summed the whole place up as an only-in-Miami kind of thing, with what he called a rascally, mischievous past. 6. Koreshan Unity, Estero, Lee County, founded in 1894. The last surviving member died in 1982. No other ghost town in America has a story like this one. Dr. Cyrus Reed Teed, born in 1839, reported that an 1869 alchemy experiment gone wrong left him badly shocked by high voltage and triggered what he called a divine illumination, a vision of God appearing as a beautiful woman who told him that humans live on the inside of a concave hollow sphere. The sun, she explained, functioned as an invisible electromagnetic battery at the center. Teed adopted the name Koresh, Hebrew for Cyrus, and declared himself the 7th messianic figure after Jesus. German homesteader Gustav Kohler donated 320 acres in Estero in 1894, and the Koreshans relocated from Chicago to build their utopia. Between 1903 and 1908, around 250 members lived communally, practicing celibacy, gender equality, and shared property. 7 women sat on the governing body, called the Planetary Court. Over time, the settlement grew to control more than 5,000 acres and operated a bakery, printing house, power plant that supplied electricity to the surrounding area years before anyone else had it, a symphony, an art gallery, and an acting troupe. They never constructed a church because to the Koreshans, the very act of living counted as worship. Between January and March of 1897, a follower named Ulysses G. Morrow carried out the Koreshan Geodetic Survey on Naples Beach using a contraption called the rectilineator, built from 12-foot mahogany sections meant to prove the Earth's surface curves inward rather than outward. A $10,000 reward went up for anyone who could disprove the results. Modern physicist Donald E. Simonek of Lock Haven University examined the data decades later and found no evidence of fraud or data cooking, concluding that the error came down to structural sag and expectation bias. Fort Myers, Marshal S.W. Sanchez pistol-whipped Teed during a street altercation on October 13, 1906, and Teed never fully recovered. When he died on December 22, 1908, his followers refused to bury him because they expected a resurrection. Decomposition forced their hand on December 27. A 1910 hurricane then destroyed his tomb on Estero Island and washed the coffin out to sea, where nobody ever recovered it. Membership fell from about 55 in 1930 to just 5 by 1956. 4 remaining members deeded 305 acres to the state of Florida in 1961. Hedwig Michel, a German refugee from Nazi persecution who had joined in 1940, outlived every other Koreshan and died in 1982 as the last of them. The Koreshan State Historic Site opened in 1967 and joined the National Register of Historic Places in 1976. Visitors still ask about a connection to David Koresh of the Branch Davidians, and the answer is that there is none beyond the shared name. 7. Brewster, Polk County, 10 miles south of Mulberry. Built in 1910 to house phosphate miners, closed in 1962, and by the 2010 census, exactly 3 people lived there. The Amalgamated Phosphate Company put up the original infrastructure, and American Cyanamid purchased the operation in 1918. At peak, roughly 800 residents occupied a racially segregated company town that included schools, a movie theater, a medical clinic, a swimming pool, and a company store. White families lived south of the mine, and African American families lived in a separate section to the east. None of that is what makes Brewster unforgettable, though. John Vincent Atanasoff, the man credited with inventing the first electronic digital computer, grew up here after his father Ivan, a Bulgarian immigrant, took an electrical engineering job at the mine. Their Brewster home marked the first house the family had ever lived in with electricity. 9-year-old Atanasoff taught himself to repair faulty wiring and developed a fascination with his father's slide rule that never let go. He finished high school at Mulberry High in just 2 years and went on to build the Atanasoff-Berry computer at Iowa State. A 1973 federal court ruling settled the matter of who invented the digital computer. Judge Earl R. Larson wrote that Eckert and Mauchly did not themselves first invent the automatic electronic digital computer, but instead derived that subject matter from one Dr. John Vincent Atanasoff. The origin point of the digital age traces back to a company town in Polk County, Florida, and that town no longer exists. American Cyanamid shut down operations in 1962 and offered workers the choice of buying their houses at a discount and relocating them, or watching the demolition crew come through. Most families scattered to Fort Meade, Bartow, and Mulberry. The deed to Brewster eventually passed to the state of Florida as partial payment of a judgment against American Cyanamid for environmental damages. The smokestack from the Brewster power plant still rises above the flat terrain, fenced off now with barbed wire by the Mosaic Company. 8. Islandia, Elliott Key, and surrounding islands, Miami-Dade County. Incorporated on June 22, 1961, and abolished on March 16, 2012. This might be the most audacious ghost town in Florida because the city was never really a city to begin with. Late in 1960, a group of developers looking to build luxury resorts, golf courses, and a causeway on Elliott Key convinced 13 of 18 registered voters to incorporate. Every single voter owned land on the island. Not one of them actually lived there. The new city covered 66.4 square miles, 90% of which was open water. First, Mayor Luther L. Brooks earned a reputation as a politically connected former bootlegger who once described a politician as, and this is a direct quote, "so crooked he can't wear his shoes." Brooks and his council brought in a large bulldozer and carved a 125-foot wide clearing down the center of Elliott Key, which they designated as the start of a 6-lane highway called Elliott Key Boulevard. Conservationists pushed back hard. Miami Herald reporter Juanita Green and Herbert Hoover Jr., the vacuum cleaner heir, organized opposition, and Congressman Dante B. Fussell drove the issue to Congress. On October 18, 1968, President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the bill creating Biscayne National Monument, which later became Biscayne National Park. The proposed 6-lane boulevard now survives as an 8-foot-wide nature trail that hikers call Spite Highway. For close to 30 years, non-resident landowners cast ballots in Islandia elections without anyone noticing the violation of state law. By the time of the 2010 census, only 18 residents showed up in the count, and all of them worked for the National Park Service. Miami-Dade County Commissioner Dennis C. Moss put it plainly, "They don't operate like a city. They don't have any elected officials. It's not a city." Official abolition came on March 16, 2012. 9. Chosen near Belle Glade, Palm Beach County, along the Hillsborough Canal on the shore of Lake Okeechobee. Founded in the early 1920s by J.R. Leatherman, a Christian pietist Dunkard from Virginia who picked the biblical name, the settlement had a Brethren church, a U.S. post office, and a school that opened in 1921. All of it vanished on September 17, 1928. The Okeechobee hurricane struck near West Palm Beach that day as a Category 4 storm packing 145-mile-per-hour winds. Lake Okeechobee, already swollen, pressed against earthen dams that gave way catastrophically and sent a wall of water crashing through every community along the southern shore. 2,500 people drowned at minimum, which made it the second deadliest hurricane in American history. Roughly 3/4 of the dead were black migrant farm workers. White victims received proper burials with ceremony, while African American victims were cremated on funeral pyres and placed in unmarked mass graves. Chosen, unlike the nearby town of Belle Glade, never rebuilt. Okeelanta, Creamer Island, Ritta Island, and Fruitcrest share that same fate. President-elect Herbert Hoover toured the disaster zone and ordered the Army Corps of Engineers to construct what became the Herbert Hoover Dike. Zora Neale Hurston channeled the horror of the storm into her 1937 novel, Their Eyes Were Watching God. Researcher Lara Chapman of the neighborly Florida captured the strange emptiness of it. Chosen does not exist, and yet, at one point it did, but details are sketchy. Nothing of the town stands today. Sugar fields cover the site. The only trace of the name that survives is the Point Chosen Swing Bridge, a hand-cranked one-way crossing that still leads to Torrey Island. 10. Leno, Columbia County, at what is now the site of Leno State Park. People first settled here in the 1860s, and the place was called Keno, named outright after the gambling game. That lasted until 1876 when, in the words of local records, ecclesiastical and commercial pressure forced a change to Leno because religious objections to the gambling association proved too strong for the community to tolerate. Leno had a grist and saw mill, a cotton gin, stores, and a hotel, which meant it could function as long as the railroad cooperated. It stopped cooperating in the 1890s when new construction bypassed the town entirely. No trains meant no commerce, and no commerce meant everybody left. Florida purchased the site in 1934 as a park and forestry station, and it became Leno State Park. The name derived from the old town name with an O apostrophe tacked on the front. A historical marker went up in 1962 to tell the story. In 2010, a Florida State Park's 75th anniversary time capsule was buried at the site, and nobody opens it until 2085. That is 60 more years before anyone reads what's inside. 11. Fort Dade, on Egmont Key. Egmont Key sits at the entrance to Tampa Bay in Hillsborough County, and Fort Dade went up here in 1898 to guard the bay during the Spanish-American War. At peak, between 300 and 600 residents lived on the island with amenities that included tennis courts and a theater. Before the fort, the island had already played a dark role in Florida history as a seminal Trail of Tears stopover in the 1850s. World War I era advances in military technology rendered the fort obsolete, and deactivation followed in the early 1920s. Egmont Key became a wildlife refuge, and the buildings began falling apart. Deteriorating brick roads, staircases, and 3 gun batteries earned the island the title of creepiest ghost town in Florida from Thrillist. But the real story happening on Egmont Key right now has nothing to do with ghosts. The Florida Trust for Historic Preservation flagged it in 2017 as one of the first Florida historic properties threatened by climate change. 500 acres of island existed in the 1940s. Roughly 200 remain today, with approximately 4 acres disappearing every year. September and October of 2024 accelerated the crisis. Hurricane Helene left watermarks 15 feet high on the lighthouse wall, and Hurricane Milton followed 2 weeks later, blowing the mess apart and driving the last of the harbor pilots who had occupied the island for 150 years to the mainland for good. Dr. Brooke Hansen, an anthropologist at the University of South Florida, and Dr. Laura Harrison of USF's Access 3D Lab are now scanning the remaining structures, the lighthouse, a cemetery with 19 crosses, and the Mellon Battery, to preserve them in digital form and in a book before rising water claims them. Creative Loafing Tampa Bay framed it starkly in a 2025 article. If we're charting the epic of climate change, mark it down, Egmont Key, 2024. 12. Rosewood, Levy County, destroyed in January of 1923, and not by a hurricane or a railroad reroute or a depleted mine. Rosewood was burned to the ground by a white mob. The community had been home to roughly 355 predominantly black residents who supported themselves with a school, churches, and a turpentine industry. A false accusation of assault in January 1923 triggered a week of organized white mob violence that killed at least 8 people, though the actual toll may run higher, and left the entire town in ashes. Survivors fled, and none of them ever came back. Decades of silence followed. Florida didn't formally acknowledge the massacre until the 1990s, when it became one of the first states in the country to do so. The Rosewood Claims Bill passed in 1994 and directed $2 million in reparations to survivors and their descendants. Director John Singleton adapted the story into a film in 1997. Nothing remains of the original town. Rosewood belongs on this list because it demonstrates that not every ghost town dies from nature or economics, and that some vanish because people decide to destroy them. 13. Sumica, Eastern Polk County, near Lake Wales, founded in 1917 and abandoned by about 1927. The name was an acronym, built from the initials of a French company called Société Universelle des Mines, Industrie, Commerce et Agriculture. Around 50 houses went up alongside a commissary, a church, and a school. By 1922, the sawmill had laid 4 miles of logging rails and churned out 35,000 feet of lumber per day. The Kissimmee River Railway, completed in December 1917, linked the operation to the Seaboard Airline Railway and kept the timber moving. And Sumica minted its own money. Aluminum company scrip in 25-cent and 5-cent denominations circulated among workers, who earned it from the company and spent it at the company store. That kind of closed economic loop defined company towns across the South. A letter found at the site, dated 1923, offers a window into what daily life felt like there. It reads, "Mamie, you will like it down here. Everybody looks good and feels good too. I have got a good job and a good horse to ride. Mamie, they is the prettiest lakes down here." Timber ran out. The post office shut down in June of 1927, and the town emptied. The Southwest Florida Water Management District acquired the site for $3.9 million, and a historical marker went up in 2013. 14. Yamato Colony, Palm Beach County, in what is now the Boca Raton area. Joe Sakai founded the Yamato Colony in 1905 with backing from Henry Flagler's Florida East Coast Railway. And for over 3 decades, this small Japanese immigrant farming community thrived, introducing new crops including pineapples to South Florida. 1941 ended all of it. Wartime anti-Japanese hysteria and forced relocations emptied the colony, scattering a community that had worked that land for more than 35 years. One lasting tribute survived: The Murakami Museum and Japanese Gardens in Delray Beach carries the colony's legacy forward as an active cultural institution and a popular destination. Among the ghost towns on this list, Yamato is rare in that someone took the time to honor the people who lived there instead of letting the memory vanish with the buildings. 15. Nichols, Polk County, roughly 2 miles west of Mulberry. The Virginia-Carolina Chemical Company founded Nichols in 1905, naming it after a Seminole War-era fort, and at its height, the town held approximately 120 houses and 400 residents with a general store, hospital, schoolhouse, and post office. The mine didn't close until August of 2000, but here's what makes Nichols different from every other phosphate town on this list. Less than a mile from the mine, the company operated a facility that produced uranium as a byproduct of phosphate processing. The U.S. Atomic Energy Commission contracted them to deliver 12 tons of uranium oxide per year between 1952 and 1959, all of it destined for Cold War weapons production. A phosphate mining town in Polk County, Florida, helped fuel America's nuclear arsenal, and most of the residents probably never knew. Company-owned housing phased out in January of 1960. Ownership of the mine bounced from Mobile Mining to Agrifos Mining LLC before final closure in August 2000, which eliminated 120 jobs. Production capacity at the end sat at 1.1 million metric tons per year, one of the smallest operations in the state. $3 million in vandalism and theft damage has accumulated at the abandoned plant since then. The post office and church, against all odds, still operate. Every one of these towns followed the same arc, founded in optimism, sustained by exploitation, and erased by the very forces the founders chose to ignore. If you made it this far, drop a comment and tell me which of these ghost towns you would actually want to visit, and if you have not already, go ahead and subscribe because there are plenty more abandoned places to explore.